And it's my pleasure to welcome you to today's talk by Jean-Louis Lauzier on the Arctic toward the end of the exception strategy, nuclear and maritime issues in the region. Strategic nuclear and maritime issues in the region. Before introducing our speaker, let me just say a few words about the topic. This isn't our first foray onto this topic in our speakers program. We've heard from a number of people over the years because, of course, the Arctic is coming onto the U.S. national security agenda, in part because of climate change and the new access that states can enjoy commercially and otherwise to the region, but also because the Arctic is emerging as a flashpoint or a potential flashpoint in major power competition in a manner that brings together the three main competitors, the United States, Russia, and China, in a potentially dangerous way. Our speaker today is the author of an important new paper on this Arctic flashpoint. The paper surveys, as I've just indicated, the strategic, nuclear, and maritime security issues in the region. The paper is actually the 64th paper in a series generated from France's leading think tank, the IFRI, the Institute for International Affairs, largely associated with the Foreign Ministry. And I commend the paper series to you. It's available in English, and the series touches on many topics of interest to the laboratory community and to the U.S. national security debate. The papers are produced out of a program on deterrence and proliferation studies at IFRI, which is a part of the Security Studies Center there. And our speaker today is a senior advisor to that center. Admiral Lauzier is a retired naval officer who left military service in 2020 after 39 years of service in the French Navy. He retired with the rank of Vice Admiral and from the position as commander of the French naval operations in the Atlantic and the Arctic. It's been my pleasure to work with Jean-Louis in various capacities over the years. We first met a decade ago when he was head of the Nuclear Forces Directorate in the French Ministry of Defense. His educational background is more diverse than many of his peers. He has, of course, a degree from the French Naval Academy, but he's also attended the staff course in the United Kingdom, and he holds a master's degree in defense studies from King's College, London. Jean-Louis, it's a pleasure to welcome you to Livermore Laboratory and to the Center for Global Security Research. Thank you so much for making the time to share your work with us. Let me turn it over to you for remarks of 30 to 45 minutes or so. I see you've already brought your slides up. And let me encourage the group, while Jean-Louis is speaking, please prepare the interventions you would like to make in the conversation. When he's done with his introductory remarks, I will turn to the hands that are then raised to join the discussion. If you would prefer to send a remark in the chat function and have me put it into play, please do so, but please do send it to me to be sure that it reaches me. Without further ado, Jean-Louis, thanks so much. Over to you.
Thank you, Brad. Thank you for inviting me to share my work on the Arctic strategic issues. And the first question you may raise is, why is it the French admiral? France is not a coastal country of Arctic. And why is it the French admiral who talks about Arctic? And actually, my interest in the strategic issues comes directly from my career in the French Navy. First, as a submariner, I have been deployed several times in this area, And lastly, as you said, Brad, during my last assignment in the French Navy, I was Commander-in-Chief for the Atlantic, so responsible for the operation in the Atlantic and in the Arctic area. And my first responsibility was anti-submarine warfare. As you may know, our SSBN force is based in Brittany, near Brest, and I had the responsibility to allow the safe and operational secure deployment of these strategic submarines. My first concern was to have enough information about the possible threats. And these threats were principally Russian submarines based near movements in the Kola Peninsula in the Arctic region. Therefore, my ops team and I had a permanent look at what was happening in that part of the world. With global warming, I was also interested in the future consequences of the progressive vanishing of sea ice in the Arctic and the potential opening of new sea routes, permitting a direct maritime link between Northern Pacific and Northern Atlantic. To have a better understanding of this future and of its limits, the French Navy deployed in September 2018 fleet named Le Rhône from Norway along the Northeast Passage until the Aleutian Islands in the Northern Pacific in about 2 weeks' time. This was the first time that the Western Navy deployed a military ship on that route, not being assisted by an icebreaker and the Russians. So my first paper at working with E3 was called Arctic towards the end of exception with a question mark. And actually I worked on that paper last fall, and I finished my work early February before the invasion of Ukraine. And of course now I would not put a question mark on that question because clearly it's irrelevant. Now the Arctic exceptions has come to an end. So why do we talk about Arctic exception? The idea clearly comes from Michael Gorbachev when he gave a speech on October 1st in 1987 in Murmansk. On that day, he said that Arctic should become a pole of peace. And he defined objectives for the region: protection of the environment, development of scientific research, and peaceful exploitation of natural resources. And in fact, in 1996, the Arctic Council was created in line with this project, bringing together the 8 states with territories north of the Arctic Circle. This is how the myth of the Arctic exception was created, an idea according to which the far north would be a zone of cooperation where external disturbances would not interfere with cooperation between coastal states. And actually, Arctic has been free of direct competition and confrontation for more than 20 years, with some real progress made on issues such as protection of environment. Tensions began really in 2018 within the Arctic Council. And the invasion of Ukraine, the Arctic Council has now stopped its work. And it has to be noticed that Russia was chairing the Arctic Council for 1 year already. The 7 Western countries resumed their work without Russia. Meanwhile, Russia begins to talk of an alternative organization to the Arctic Council, in which Russia can invite China to participate as a full member, not only as an observer as it is now in the Arctic Council.
Jean-Louis, should we be advancing your slides? There we go. Thank you.
Okay. I will first talk about a few quick points on boundaries and climate change, and then I will focus on Russia's strategy and the possible evolution after the war in Ukraine, and on China's strategy. I will pass more rapidly on Western strategy, and then dwell on the specific issues such as civilian, environmental, nuclear issues, and finally on maritime issues. So when we talk about Arctic, what are we talking about? According to the common definition, the Arctic is the covers your geographical area bounded by the Arctic Circle. However, within the Arctic Council, other zones have been defined, which you can see on this map. We take the definition about human development, protection of fauna or flora, and assessment and monitoring of risk prevention. So they may have several definitions for Arctic. From a strategic and military point of view, of course, it's important to take the continuity factor or discontinuity factors. And it's, for example, very difficult to say whether the Arctic finishes at the Arctic Circle when you are in the Atlantic. And obviously, the Barents Sea may be seen as a continuation of the North Atlantic, or the reverse. You can say that the Arctic begins on the what we call the Greenland, Iceland, UK gap. And this will be my definition of Arctic. It will begin for me in that area. On the other side, on the Pacific side, the Arctic Circle just passes through the Bering Straits. Having said that, the Bering Sea has got some climatic characteristics which are very close to the Arctic, the one we see in the Arctic Ocean. Therefore, from a strategic point of view, we also normally put the Bering Sea within the Arctic. The second point I want to make is about the boundaries. Is the internal boundaries. It is widely spread that the Arctic is a region where the boundaries have yet to be defined and where the current powers would be ready for confrontation if necessary to exploit the resources. This viewpoint is false. The disputes concerning land and maritime boundaries have all been settled in the Arctic states. It has to be noticed as the last one has been settled just 2 weeks ago between Denmark, Greenland, and Canada on the other side, by the Hans Island, just between Greenland and some Canadian islands. And of course, there is a question of the extension of the continental shelf after the EEZ, but all countries have agreed to settle their views, and within the Convention of the Law of the Sea, which has been signed and ratified by all Arctic states, except United States, but which respects the principle and ensures that other maritime power respect it. Of course, it remains to be seen whether Russia will continue on this policy after the Ukraine war. Point about global warming and climate change. The latest report by the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, IPCC, indicates that this region will warm up more than twice as fast as the rest of the planet. Arctic is expected to experience an increase in minimum temperature in the coldest days at about 3 times the rate of warming worldwide. Arctic ocean ice pack has already undergone significant reduction in area, losing about 30% between the 80s decade and the last decade, 2010-2019. The IPCC indicates that the ocean should experience the first ice-free episode, which means less than 15% of the area of the 80s decades, at least once before the year 2050, or in 30 years' time. Qualitative terms, we are witnessing the disappearance of 20-year ice. This trend opens the door for an increase in the use of polar routes north of Siberia or Canada, or even transpolar routes. This will be the last point of our presentation. But another consequence of global warming is also the melting of permafrost, which softens the ground in a number of regions, weakening the urban, industrial, and military infrastructure located there. And when we talk about military infrastructure, we can think about air bases. So obviously, Russia is the dominant power in the Arctic. From a geographical, historical, and economical point of view, Russia is a major power. Its territory extends about more than 160 degrees of longitude from the west to east, and the area covered by the waters over which Russia has sovereignty or rights according to the law of the sea represents about 45% of the Arctic waters. From a historical point of view, these waters and lands have a strong significance for Russia. From the 16th century to the 18th century, when Russian territory did not extend to the shore of Baltic or the Black Sea, Arctic and the White Sea were the main gateway for maritime trade with Western Europe. Russian expeditions, both on land and at sea, from the 17th century till the 18th century, contributed largely to the Russification of the large part of the Arctic. Maritime link between Russia and Europe via the Norwegian Sea and the Barents Sea, most of which are ice-free all year round due to the influence of the Gulf Stream, diminished in importance after the victorious war of Peter the Great, which gave Russia access to the shore of the Baltic Sea on a permanent basis. But this link had a strong importance during World War II. From an economic point of view, the Arctic has a considerable economic weight today. Last year, the area generated about 50% of Russian gross domestic product and about 20% of tax and customs revenue for populations which represent only 1% of the whole Federation of Russia. And this is, of course, mainly thanks to exports of oil, gas, and minerals, which are exported, as you can see on this map, by sea. So the planned development of the Russian Arctic has been the subject of regularly updated documents. The framework document today of this policy, entitled Foundation of the Russian Federation State Policy in the Arctic for the period up to 2035, has been approved by President Putin in March 2020, and thus sets out the general objective of Russia in this region: ensuring Russian sovereignty and territorial integrity in the Arctic. I will come back later on that. Preserving the Arctic as a territory of peace, stability, and mutually beneficial partnership for the Arctic states. And of course, it's clearly the goals of the Arctic Council. Increasing the quality of life and well-being of the population of the Arctic zone of the Russian Federation. This is a very important point for Russia because, as I told you, the Russian population living there is about 1%, the old population of the Russian Federation, and tends to decrease in numbers. Actually, many people are leaving this region, and so the Russian government tries to have the people living on a longer period in the far north. Developing this region as a strategic resource with sustainable use to accelerate Russian economic growth. Clearly, if Russia wants any economic growth, they are relying on this part of the world, and especially, of course, export of gas and minerals. Fifth point, developing the Northern Sea route as a competitive maritime route in the world market. I will come back later on whether it's achievable or not. Finally, protecting the environment and preserving the native lands and traditional way of life for indigenous people. So, while economic development is of major interest to Russia, as is improvement of the well-being of the population, the first aim is to ensure territorial integrity of Russian sovereignty. Despite the absence of territorial disputes, the preservation of this integrity and the protection of the zone, according to a bastion strategy, has resulted in progressive nuclearization visible since the beginning of the year 2000. This dynamic responds to three different objectives. First one is the restoration of the Russian military presence in the Arctic after the period of the 90s, which saw it decline significantly. Military investments in the region have thus followed the rebound of Russian military spending on a national scale since 2008. The modernization of Russian military capabilities in the region. Rather than resorting, as in the day of the USSR, to the mass development of capabilities all along the 7,000 kilometers of coastlines, efforts are now focused on a few key bases equipped with state-of-the-art detection and defense systems, while relying elsewhere on the strategic mobility of forces capable of moving quickly to points threatened by possible adversary. And third point, the protection of critical infrastructures. On the one hand, the new gas, oil, and mining installations, as well as the Northern Sea route, which are vital to the development of the region, to the exploitation and export of resources. And on the other hand, all the strategic installations, mainly concentrated in the Kola Peninsula, which is home to the Northern Fleet, with about 2 Russian SSBN, about 8 nuclear-powered ballistic missile submarines, about 13 nuclear attack submarines, and 5 conventionally powered attack submarines. The increased importance of this region for Russia has been reflected on an organizational level as the creation in December 2014 the Northern Fleet Joint Strategic Command, which became a 5th independent military district in January 2021, alongside the Western, Southern, Central, and Eastern districts. To complete the system, Russia has undertaken the renovation or even the complete reconstruction of numerous infrastructure dating from the Soviet era. The heart of this effort are the 3 tricolor bases, and you'll see on the slide a photograph of one of the tricolor bases, which are based on the island of Franz Josef Land, on Kotelny Island, and in Novaya Zembla. These bases are designed to operate autonomously for a year or more and house a few hundred men, 600 to 800 men. They are equipped with long-range and short-range air defense system, as well as anti-ship system. They are also equipped with runways that can be used by MiG-31. This military presence covering the new economy infrastructure in the Arctic area has primarily a defensive role. However, in addition to the Arctic Brigade positioned close to the western borders and the parachute divisions, which are mobile by definition, the Northern Fleet, based on the Kola Peninsula, can play a role that is not purely defensive, through the deployment of several units in the Black Sea to support the Ukraine invasion. To conclude on Russia, what will be the consequences of the Ukrainian war? Clearly, the sanction will have an impact on Russia's development in its far north. Some of the technologies used to reduce gas to liquid states are Western technologies, not yet controlled by the Chinese or the Russians. Therefore, some of the Russians' projects will be delayed, and it is unlikely that Russia will achieve its same on the objective they have to develop the Northern Sea route. However, Russia can count on China, who needs oil, gas, and minerals to develop Siberia and Arctic. On a military point of view, we can clearly expect more frictions between Russian and Western forces in this area. Now we go to China. Clearly, China is the new player in the area. And as you know, of course, China has not got any part of its territory north of the Arctic Circle. But actually, China is experiencing in its northern part climatic conditions close to those encountered in the harshest regions of the Arctic. And so China has claimed since the beginning of the 21st century a polar identity that it intends to assert even more in the future. China began to express its desire to play an active role in the Arctic in 2005, an expression that has begun continually reinforced since then. In 2013, Beijing included the desire to become a polar nation as a key element of its maritime strategy. In 2014, President Xi Jinping, who had recently taken office, gave a speech about the icebreaker Zhuolong in Hobart Harbor, affirming China's vocation to become a great polar power. In 2017, during a speech in Geneva before the United Nations, he reaffirmed that the poles were a new frontier for cooperation between nations, as well as seabed, space, and cyberspace. In 2018, China published its Arctic White Paper, in which it defined itself as a near Arctic state. Acknowledging the sovereignty of the 8 states over internationally recognized territories, the document also reaffirmed that other nations, including China, have rights there, including on the ice seas in the area as defined by Article 137 of United Nations Convention of the Sea. And finally, also within the perimeter covered by the Svalbard Treaty. It clearly states, this white paper clearly states China's goal to participate in the governance of the Arctic. The white paper also stresses the importance of the Arctic for China in terms of maritime routes, what they call the Polar Silk Road, in terms of exploitation of oil, gas, of mineral resources that they need for their economic development, and finally, on fishing. Politically, China has reiterated its interest in the Arctic. A joint statement between President Xi Jinping and President Putin, the opening ceremony of the Winter Olympic Games last February, supporting the Sino-Russian cooperation for sustainable development of the region. Most of the documents have talked about stress the importance of win-win cooperation, science, and environmental protection. However, many observers believe that science and diplomacy are only being put forward to support Chinese economic and military ambitions. The idea expressed in the book Science of Military Strategy, released in 2013, is that China will have to defend its interest in this new frontier, not to acquire strategic resources, secure access to sea routes, just as it does in the other common space of oceans, space, and cyber warfare. Moreover, regular references are made to the idea that control of the Arctic confers a major advantage in controlling 3 continents, 2 oceans, and the main powers of the Northern Hemisphere. China has been very active on the diplomatic front, with numerous visits by high-level leaders in the early 2010s. These efforts were crowned with success in 2013, with China's admission as an observer to the Arctic Council. In the economic sphere, Chinese activism has mainly resulted in investments in the energy and mining sectors in Russia, but also in other coastal territories such as Greenland. However, this activism is now being impacted by a new approach by several states, which are less inclined to give up strategic mining assets, as illustrated by the Canadian government's refusal to sell a mine to Chinese interests by the end of 2020. These Chinese investments also concern high-tech industries, biotech industries, green tech industries, and semiconductors industries. Sweden has been the main gateway for this investment, attracting the largest share of Chinese investment in Europe in 2018. Finally, Chinese conventional military operations in the Arctic have so far remained limited in scale. We just noticed a group of five ships sent to the Bering Sea, along the coast of Alaska in 2015. But clearly, they are preparing. They seem to prepare for future operations with their icebreaker. Whereas China does not have a strong presence today in the conventional military domain, it is actively pursuing influence operations, and we see that mainly in Canada and Sweden. I pass now very rapidly on Western reaction. We have had very late reaction. You know that for USA have paid very little attention for the last 25 years to the Arctic area. And one good indicator of this low American interest in the region is the number of icebreakers. The US Coast Guard today possesses only 2 aging vessels. However, you know that after a long period of disinterest, the United States have resumed activity in the region beginning in 2018 to address Russian military rebuilding and modernization, as well as Chinese political and economic activism. And the United States government have issued several strategies, the one from DoD, as well as every single service which has issued a strategy, and as well as a Coast Guard. The major change, of course, in the Arctic region concerning Western countries today is the willingness of Sweden and Finland to join NATO. You know that it has been approved today as a NATO summit in Madrid. Of course, there is still some work to do, but nevertheless, Turkey has opted out for his veto. Norway, Sweden, Finland, Denmark have issued recently Arctic policies, emphasizing the new Russian threat, well as UK or France. I will not dwell on that, but I'm happy to take questions in order to pass now to nuclear issues. So you all know that the world has now entered a new nuclear age since really the middle of the last decade. And the war in Ukraine is just a first point in this changing, but we saw the changing environment in the nuclear domain, changing on the last year, and clearly it started with the invasion of Crimea in 2014. And we also see the willingness of China to become the world leading power by the middle of the century, increasing its nuclear arsenal. But you all know that better than I do, so I will not dwell on this issue. I will only go rapidly on a few issues specific to Arctic. First of all, Arctic remains one of the main areas for Russia to test its new weapons systems, whether they are SLBMs, cruise missiles, and so on. And sometimes it has risks to the environment, as it was demonstrated by the failure of the Burevestnik test in the White Sea in the August 2019. The Arctic also remains for Russia the primary reason for training Russian nuclear forces, such as the GROM exercises, during which ballistic missiles are regularly launched from the Barents Sea to the Sea of Okhotsk, and vice versa. The region is also currently marked by the renewal of radar early warning systems. After the fall of the USSR, Russia faced the need to replace the radar which were placed in the republics which had become independent. And so they have built a new kind of radar, the famous Voronezh ABM radar, the first one was tested in 2005 in St. Petersburg. And this train is now nearing completion, with two radars located north of the Arctic Circle, one in the Kola Peninsula and one near the Pectora Mountains. Recently, the government of Canada announced also plans to spend about $4 billion over the next 6 years to modernize NORAD. The region is also marked by an increase of submarine activity. Arctic remains a bastion for Russian SSBN. As major base for Russian submarines, they have increased their deployment in the Atlantic. They have increased them in a way where they regularly deploy 5 to 10 SSN or SSGN at the same time, just putting Western ASW forces under pressure. And therefore, Western countries need to be able to conduct ASW operations in this area. And finally, and though it's not directly linked to nuclear issues, it should be remembered that the Arctic is of interest for the installation of ground stations to control Earth observation satellites in polar orbit. For example, the American, you have a base in Galloway, which hosts such ground station. European, we have a station in the Svalbard, which controls, for example, the Galileo satellites. And it's not surprising that one of the cable which was linking Norway to Svalbard has been cut clearly by a human intervention. And of course, everyone thinks it's due to a Russian intervention. And clearly, they cut this cable which was linking Norway to this station which controls some satellites in the low orbit. It has also to be mentioned that China has built a station in the northern Sweden. Now I'm going to dwell a little bit more on civil nuclearization, which is something which is not very well known. Today, Russia is the only country in the world to operate a fleet of civilian nuclear-powered ships. These ships are mainly icebreaker, with the exception of one cargo. They are based in moments where their support base and maintenance facilities adapted to nuclear propulsion are located. At the beginning of 2022, 5 icebreakers were in service, 4 of an older generation. The picture you see upper left, and a more recent one that you can see on the right side of the slide. And this new generation ship, the Arctica, will be followed by 4 others. These icebreakers are really big ships. They are about 34,000 tons and capable of breaking ice until 3 meters deep. They will be followed by a new class with a displacement. They will be twice as big as this class, and they will be capable of breaking ice through 4 meters back. And this last class will probably be commissioned between 2030 and 2035, giving Rosatom, which is the major energy supplier, atomic energy supplier in Russia, and who also operates these ships, and who actually is also the operator of the Northern Sea route, a fleet of 8 modern icebreakers, which of course will give strong capabilities to Rosatom. 2035, it should also be noted that Russia may not be longer the only power to operate such ships. Obviously, China is considering the construction of the nuclear-powered icebreaker. The civilian nuclear-powered fleet is not the only atomic feature of the Arctic, civil atomic feature of the Arctic. The region is also the first to have seen the commissioning of a floating nuclear power plant, the academic Lomonosov. You see a picture on the right at the low side. This power plant comprises a base carrying 2 35 megawatt reactors. It was stored in eastern Siberia in the summer of 2019 and has begun to deliver its first electrical kilowatt in December 2019. 4 new floating nuclear plants have been ordered in 2021 to supply power to a copper mine located in eastern Siberia. These new plants will be equipped with 55 megawatt reactors and are expected to be operational around 2026. These new orders will allow Rosatom to develop and lower the cost of a new energy source in the Arctic. Floating nuclear plants, we could find a promising market in many regions of the world. Finally, it should be noted that Rosatom is also developing onshore activities in the Arctic. The company has announced construction of a power plant featuring a small modular reactor also in eastern Siberia, which should be commissioned in 2022, so by the end of the year. The Russians have got, nevertheless, a legacy to cope with. The end of the Cold War left an Arctic legacy of pollution due to widespread dumping of nuclear waste and contaminated material. Clearly, the Soviets used the Kara Sea and the Barents Sea as the dumping ground for radioactive waste. According to information provided by the Russian government in 2012, 17,000 containers of radioactive waste, low or high level of radioactivities, 19 ships containing radioactive waste, 14 nuclear reactors, 5 of which with still the core still intact, and other radioactive elements are dumped there. The Soviet nuclear attack submarine, K-27, all with its core intact, probably is the rate that needs to be watched more closely. It was equipped with 2 experimental fast reactors using a liquid metal coolant lead. Following an accident affecting one of the reactors in 1968, the submarine was quickly taken out of service, and in 1982, the Soviet Navy decided to scuttle the submarine on the east coast of Novaya Zembla with its damaged reactor. And it scuttled it in an area where the depth is about 30 meters. So it clearly constitutes a grave hazard to environment. At the end of the Cold War, given the danger caused by the numerous nuclear vessels, the Soviet Navy and their support facilities on land, many programs were launched, mainly financed by the G7 states and the European Union via the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development. This program resulted in the dismantling of about 200 former Soviet submarines and the construction of onshore reactor storage facilities. However, there is still some work to do, and this will be an issue to see whether Russia will be able to do that after the Ukrainian war. I now pass to the maritime issues, and first of all, to address the question of are there alternative routes to the southern routes passing by the Malacca Straits, the Suez Canal, or the Panama Canal. The quest for a direct northern sea route between Europe and Asia without using the southern routes around the Capes of Good Hope or Cape Horn is a long-standing one. However, it was only in 1879 that a Finn, northern Scot, was able to link Atlantic Ocean to the Pacific Ocean via the northern east sea route, and the Northwest Passage was opened by Amundsen only at the beginning of the 20th century. So with global warming and the melting of sea ice, 3 different routes can be envisaged in the future. The Northwest Passage along the coast of the North American continent and along Canada, the Northeast Passage or Northern Sea Route for the Russians along the coast of Siberia, the transpolar route through the center of the Arctic Ocean, avoiding the straits, the relatively shallow waters of the other 2 routes. These routes are about 30% shorter than those passing through the Strait of Malacca to connect northern Asia to northern Europe, and could theoretically present an alternative to them in the future for 5 to 6 months of the year. However, the future feasibility of these new routes has yet to be demonstrated, particularly in the case of the Northwest Passage. Given the currents in the regions, the ice pack during breakups tends to accumulate on the northwestern coast of the American continent. The Northwest Passage is therefore the route least likely to be of future interest. As for the transpolar route, which is potentially of greatest interest as it avoids the constraints of the Northern Sea Route, is not currently accessible and will probably not be until around 2050. Even then, it will be affected by many difficult environmental conditions, drifting ice and iceberg, fog, polar laws. The Northern Sea Route, which is used today, especially for Russian oil and gas exports, is the one that should see the greater changes in the next 2 decades, depending, of course, on the issue of the Ukrainian crisis. Traffic has already increased significantly on the last few years. But today, most of the traffic is destined to or originating from Russian ports, with only 2 million tons of traffic, transit traffic from Pacific to Atlantic or vice versa. Also, a shorter transit from Pacific to Atlantic, the Northern Sea Route is limited by numerous factors. Multiple straits, one of which does not exceed 13 meters in depth, incomplete hydrography, request for authorization to use the NSR, need for escort by a Russian icebreaker for vessels that do not have a nice category, allowing them to transit alone, and finally, insurance surcharges in polar zone. While 2021 saw a new traffic record destined to be broken year after year, we will see whether it will be the case, also illustrated some of the risks. When 2,000 ships were stranded by early season sea ice, the eastern part of the Northern Sea Route for several weeks in November 2021. So now I will finish my presentation with a consideration of the status of the strait. since these maritime routes may become more attractive, the status of certain straits used by these routes need to be examined. The two states concerned by this route, Canada for the Northern West Passage, Russia for the Northern Sea route, introduce respective rules for the rules of these straits. I will now go directly to the Russian case. Russia has defined waters of several islands of archipelagos along its Siberian coastline as internal waters. So between Novaya Zemlya and Russia, the Severnaya Zemlya archipelago, the New Siberian island. And you see on this map what they call an accept as trade baseline claim. And so that means that, for example, when you see the strait between Severnaya Zemlya and Siberia, are these Russian claims that they are internal waters, that means that they consider that any ship has to ask for the right to go through the straits. And of course, the strait, which is called the Vikitsky Straits, is not recognized by the Russians as an international strait. This straits, because I take it as an example, is twice as large as the Dover Straits, which separates UK from France, and which is, of course, is an international strait. So the Russians are considering that these straits are part of their internal waters, and therefore do not allow other vessels to sail in that strait, including the military vessels. Clearly, United States and France do not recognize this interpretation and contest strongly this interpretation by Russia. So this is why France transited a naval vessel, the Rhone, which is an auxiliary vessel. You can see it on the map on the right side. And we sailed this ship from the Norwegian Sea to the Pacific Ocean in September 2018, using the several of the straits claimed as internal water by Russia, without making a request for permission from Russia. Deliberately chose an auxiliary ship, not a combat vessel, so as not to send a signal that could be interpreted in a threatening manner by Russia. A few months after this transit, Russia announced that foreign military vessels using the Northern Sea route had to submit a request with 45 days notice to take on board a Russian pilot, reserving the right to take measures, including the use of force, to enforce this new rule. This claim is clearly outside the scope of the international law of the sea. However, at this stage, it does not appear to be included in Russian legal systems. I know that the US Navy discusses the idea of conducting follow-up operation in the Arctic. However, I also know that there are reflections that as long as the United States do not have enough icebreaker, it may be safer not to do that now. But of course, it will depend on the decisions of your government. So now, to conclude, the strategic significance of the Arctic has been substantial since the middle of the 20th century. This significance is clearly going to increase under the effect of global warming and with the effect of the new international order after the invasion of Ukraine. In the near future, defense and security issues are probably going to prevail over those related to environmental protection. The Arctic is one of the theaters of renewed competition between powers that the world has been witnessing since 2014. Closely linked to the Euro-Atlantic space since World War II and the Cold War, the Arctic will also be increasingly connected to the Indo-Pacific theater and it is likely to reflect the rifts, the frictions between power in that region, particularly after the Ukraine invasion. Arctic importance is going to grow because it is at Euro-Atlantic and Indo-Pac crossroads. As Russia is behaving as a revisionist power, this militarization of Arctic is clearly a matter of concern for the other Western coastal states and Western states, which are reacting by reinvesting in this defense. And this concern is clearly manifested by Sweden and Finland with the partnership now, their participation in NATO. Moreover, the deployment in large number with increasing frequency of modern submarines from the bases of the Kola Peninsula towards the Atlantic, with offensive intent, potentially threatening maritime lines of communication, as well as the implementation of oceanic deterrence by the three Western navies possessing these capabilities, can only lead to the deployment of anti-submarine warfare system, currency, and of agency. China, a revisionist power aiming for world leadership by mid-century, is increasingly present in the Arctic. Its power is today exercised primarily in the political sphere with the implementation of influence, financial, and economic cooperation. Its military presence today will also inevitably be reinforced. Despite this strong growth in armament and antagonism, a confrontation remains unlikely, in my view, because the various protagonists are either nuclear powers or members of a nuclear alliance, thus preventing extreme reaction and the outbreak of an armed confrontation. This will, of course, result only if we maintain a strong and credible deterrence. However, the renewed competition between the powers will lead to an acceleration of contestation of frictions. We have to be prepared for that. And this concludes my presentation. I will be now happy to take your questions.